All right, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Atypical Security Guard heading into work. Beautiful day, but it's chilly. All right, today we're going to be talking about First Amendment audits. More specifically, First Amendment audits related to security guards. I have become a big fan of these First Amendment audit channels. You know, as somebody who really appreciates the Constitution, I consider myself a patriot, consider myself someone who loves this country and what it stands for. I really have come to appreciate the benefit of what a First Amendment audit shows people in terms of whether or not our government officials, our local officials, our law enforcement officers, whether or not they understand our constitutional rights, but more importantly, whether or not they are going to uphold them. Now, that being said, I also work in the private security industry, which kind of puts me potentially in the crosshairs in terms of industry, right? A lot of times on these First Amendment audits, the security guards, they're so untrained, they're so inept. Now, you know, we a lot of times put the lack of training on the companies. We put the lack of training on, you know, the supervisors, the organizations. But guys, when it comes to the First Amendment, when it comes to the respecting of rights, this is all stuff that we should have been taught in school. Definitely stuff that we should have been taught in our homes. But I mean, we all know that's not the case right now, right? So if you're a private security guard, more than likely, you probably don't know a lot about the Constitution. And if you're working in the private security industry, when it comes to First Amendment auditors, where they can stand, what they can do, where they can be, you're probably getting zero training on that. I mean, you see that the law enforcement officers, even they a lot of times don't understand what's going on, what can be done. So if you're working in private security and you have to deal with a First Amendment auditor, how do you handle that? Generally, if you're watching the videos on YouTube, it goes south, right? Because we're put in this really bad predicament. Even if you know I don't want to say the laws surrounding a First Amendment audit, even if you're aware of the freedoms that come along with a First Amendment audit, if you're working for a company, you're working for an organization, or, you know, you're there to protect a manager or associates, you're not going to really have a lot of leeway to speak up in that situation. So if that person has their phone out and they're making a video and your job is to do what you're told, how do you handle that without ending up looking like a dumbass in front of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people? That's what we're going to be talking about today, okay? Number one, you need to understand that this is something that is happening more and more frequently. I'm not here to argue the validity of a First Amendment audit, if it should be happening. I know there's people on both sides of the fence. Some people absolutely hate a First Amendment audit. They think that they are doing nothing but causing problems, trying to get a reaction out of people, trying to get a rise out of people, putting people who are just doing their job in a bad position, bad predicament. A lot of times these guys are trying to get lawsuits. You know, I can totally see it. I get it. I understand where, in that regard, how it's frustrating and it, you know, it's infuriating. But freedom is scary, right? If you don't exercise your freedoms, you lose them. And I think that is something that needs to be discussed. That's a different video, okay? If you're in the private security industry, you're not getting this training, I'm going to be the person that helps you somewhat navigate it. Now, the first thing that I would say, if you're working in private security, it's no different than anything else. The first step is acceptance. You have to accept that this happens. You have to accept that private security guards find themselves on the short end of the stick a lot of times in these things, and start to figure out how you're going to navigate it. If you don't have a policy with the company that you're working for, if your supervisor has never brought it up, if it's never happened to you, now is the time that you should be talking to your company. You should ask your supervisor in an email, how do we handle a First Amendment audit? It's quite possible that if your supervisor is over the age of 40, they might say, what the fuck is a First Amendment audit? And this would be a great time for you to maybe send a video or send a link, or in some regard try to explain to them what it is. It would also be a great thing to kind of talk about the amount of money, the fact that it causes litigation, all of the negatives that come with people having their rights violated with the First Amendment audit. That would be a great way to start the conversation and figure out what it is that they want you to do from their standpoint, and if you can, get that in writing, okay? The second thing is to understand that no matter where you're working as a private security guard, no matter what you're doing, what capacity you're working in, the property is not yours. I'm not saying that in terms of it being public property, right? A lot of times the First Amendment audit, is about the public property, the right of access to public property. But I mean this in a very literal sense. Wherever you're working, whatever you're doing, whatever job you're performing as a private security guard, that property is not yours. And the reason why I say that is that the biggest issue that you're going to find when you're watching private security guards, and to a greater extent law enforcement officers, when they're dealing with the First Amendment auditor, it becomes an ego battle. An ego battle over whether or not you're able to enforce your will and get this person to either stop doing what they're doing or start doing what you want them to do. If you understand that the property is not yours, and you take the personal issue out of it, it's a lot easier to navigate a First Amendment audit. Now, here in Portland, we have a very famous guy who was really doing this years ago, way before it was called First Amendment auditing. This is just a guy that walks around Portland who literally just tries to fuck with people. Recording the police, recording police officers, when they're eating, police officers when they're sitting in their cars, definitely when they're in the commission of their duties. That's something that's been happening in Portland like forever. This is such a prominent area for activism and social unrest that happens all the time. And there's a guy who's very famous here for basically stalking police officers. They had to put a restraining order against him and the former chief of police, because this guy would literally follow the chief of police around, would record him. He uploads all these videos to YouTube. This guy's very well known. Now, I kind of peeped this guy early on and heard a lot about him. In the area that I was working when I first started working here in Portland, I would see him a lot. So I started asking questions. When I found out that he had a restraining order against him for stalking the chief of police, I looked up his information. At the time, there was a website that gave out public information on people that were, in the system, so to speak. I was able to pull up his mugshot. His mugshot had all the information on there in terms of the stalking charges and all this other bullshit. Took a little screenshot of that. Now, at the time, I had no idea about First Amendment audits, and I just heard this guy was harassing people and would typically come up and start bothering people. So in 2020, when everything was happening here in Portland, the same issues that the police officers were dealing with, private security started dealing with. People started filming private security officers. People started, harassing private security officers. So I had this guy's picture and arrest record on a screenshot, and I put it in a special folder on my phone. And so one day this guy shows up, comes over with his phone, his GoPro, and I'm like, oh my God, that's him. And he walks into the location, and I'm like, hey, I just gotta give you a heads up, this is a private business. You're not supposed to be filming in here, if you could just, and he turns around, what are you doing? Who are you? Give me your DPSSD number, just all this other bullshit. And I said, oh, hang on one second. I gotta ask you a question real quick before we go any further. And I pull up his information and I put the phone up to his camera and I go, "Is this you?" And I say his name. Dude, he almost took a shit right there on the floor. I wouldn't suggest handling situations like that. And again, that was before I started to appreciate the benefit of a First Amendment audit. But this guy, I think he's kind of filtered into becoming a First Amendment auditor, but he just likes to harass people. That's a little side note, little side conversation. So anyway, understand that the property is not yours. Take the personal issues out of how you're interacting with people and just do your job. At the end of the day, I always say that short of any directives from your company, if they're not telling you what they want you to do, how they want you to handle it, how they want you to address it, my opinion is the best thing for you to do. Number one, okay, take the emotion out of it. Number two, just be nice. If someone comes into your location, let's just say that it's a public building where they have access to it, let the debate about where they are, what they do, how they film, all of that needs to come from the management side. Whoever you're working for, the manager, the contractor, the supervisor, the location, the site that you're on, let the argument always come from that individual and not you. Someone comes in and you have a belief or a feeling that they can't film in a certain location, you make that initial approach. You're nice, you're cordial. "Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. How are you? Hey, just want to give you a heads up. We don't allow filming in this location. It's our policy." And when they start in on the fact that a policy does not supersede the law, that a policy does not, give the location that they're at the right to infringe upon their rights, stop having the conversation. Not a problem. Let me go ahead and get somebody from management and have them have a conversation with you. At that point, when management's having the conversation with the First Amendment auditor, you're back in your primary role, which is to protect the associates, protect the management, protect the property. At that point, you're no longer engaging this person on the action of the First Amendment audit. What you're doing is simply standing there and protecting the people who your company is there to provide service for. If you make sure that that's the only interaction that you're having and you're dealing with the actions of the person, when it gets to the point that they want to initiate a trespass, if they want you to remove somebody from the location, this is where it gets a little dicey, because you might have management that says, "Hey, I want that person out of here. Get him out right now. Fuck him." Now, this is where you have to know, do you have the authority to enforce that trespass at that point? Do you have the authority in that situation to now go hands-on? Can you physically remove somebody? Is there a revised statute? Is there any sort of justification that you can use just at the verbal command from the people that you're working for to remove this person? And if you don't know that, this is something that you need to ask your management. Because the last thing that you want to do in this situation when you're working in a private security capacity is put your hands on someone, get physical with them, physically remove them or drag them out of a location where they have every legal right to be. Now, the question is, how do you explain that to the person that you're working for? Great question, great question. Because we all know if you're working in private security, your manager tells you, "Hey, get this person out of here." Your manager says, "I don't want that person in here." For some reason you say no, or you fail to do that, you're probably not going to be working in that location very much longer. This is my advice. If you're hearing this, if you're aware of what I'm saying, if you are working in a location where this is a possibility, and at this point, I'm going to go so far as to say this is a possibility in any location where you're working. Here's my advice. Talk to your managers, talk to your site supervisors, talk to the contractors about First Amendment audits well before they happen. A lot of times when I say something like this, private security guards who follow this channel, they'll say, well, I don't have the authority to talk to my supervisor on that site. I don't have the authority to have a conversation with site management. This would be a good time for you to send another email. This would be a good time for you to send another email to your supervisor. I don't think that it has to be a direct business meeting type conversation with your management or supervisor. I would hope that whatever site you're working at, you have enough interaction with the people that are there that you could have a one-off conversation. The conversation just simply needs to be something along the lines of the fact that this happens, that it can happen, that these things can become extremely litigious, and that in that situation, going hands-on to simply remove somebody might put everybody in a position of liability. However, you're there to protect them. You're going to make sure you do your job. But in those situations, contacting law enforcement, getting law enforcement there, even if you have to dial 911, and let law enforcement be the arm of the situation, no pun intended, that removes this person. I don't want to go so far as to say that people that are performing First Amendment audits are just looking for attention, but it is lucrative. It is a reason to have a platform on YouTube. It gets a lot of views. It gets a lot of engagement. So people are able to get ad revenue off of that. People are making a pretty decent amount of money by doing First Amendment audits. I don't want to devalue what it brings to the table and the benefits that it provides, but there is a financial component to it, and we just have to admit that, right? So having that conversation and letting people know in management, letting people know in your company, letting people know that might have the authority to potentially direct you to try and remove somebody, a great conversation to have way before that situation ever pops up. Also, very important for you to know how you're going to handle it. Guys, if a First Amendment auditor is on your location or on your site and they do something that violates the law, they do something that puts someone in danger, they do something that is threatening, that is egregiously aggressive, you have every right to engage and deal with that situation. Remember, you're always addressing the action. You're not addressing the person. There should not be any verbal back and forth with this person. You shouldn't be arguing with this person. You should not be cussing this person out, giving threats. If you have the authority to give a lawful general command to leave the property, if you're able to do that, that's different. But getting involved in an argument, a back and forth conversation, debating the Constitution, any of the stuff that is just going to create content, that's not your job, that's not your place, and it's not good business. Because at the end of the day, when they chop that video up and they put it into a YouTube short or they put it on TikTok, there's not going to be a lot of context behind it. You just don't want to see a video you like, doing all that kind of shit with your company patch on, okay? No bueno. Figure out how you're going to address these situations. Know where your property lines are. Know if you're working in a public space or a private space. Reach out to your direct supervisor within your company. Ask them if they are aware of this, how they want you to handle it. If you can, get that in writing. If you're comfortable, if you're able, a lot of people aren't on either side of this equation. Talk to the people that you're working for, the locations and the sites. Make them aware of it. Do your best to explain to them and get across to them where the liability would come in if you were to try and physically remove someone simply for standing or remaining in a public spot, and that potentially either your company has directed you to do A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3, or that you're aware of this and you're doing everything you can to keep everyone out of hot water. And your idea at this point in time is that if it ever gets to that point, we'll just call 911, we'll get the cops here, we'll have the cops remove them, okay? I think it's good to be preparatory and think about this stuff come up with a plan, and know how you're going to handle it. Once that camera's in your face, I know a lot of people are like, hey, I don't care, like it is what it is. Once that camera's in your face and things start to happen, it's really easy to get flustered. Most of the time when security guards are in a situation where they get flustered, that's when they start to say things, start to do things, start to engage in actions that not only make us look bad, but generally get us in trouble. So I'm telling you, the more you can prepare for it now, the better. And hopefully you're in a position where you have thick enough skin to where someone calling you names, someone making fun of you, someone doing their best to get a rise out of you, you're able to deal with that. And it's a lot harder. I want to tell you guys, it's a lot harder to deal with those things, even if you've gotten to the point where you have thick skin. A lot harder to deal with those things when you're on camera. When someone has that camera in your face, people are watching, people are chiming in, they're laughing, you know, they're hurling insults at you. A lot more difficult when they've got that camera in your face. So do your absolute best to get, you know, comfortable with that potential situation before it happens so you can navigate it. About to hit a traffic jam right here. All right, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about First Amendment audits? Do you support them? Do you think that the people who are doing it for a noble purpose, or are they just trying to cause problems? If you work in the private security industry, have you ever experienced one? Have you ever been the center of attention, so to speak, of someone having a camera in your face? How did you deal with it? Do your companies have a policy? Does anybody here in this thread now or in the future, does your company have a policy on this? And lastly, do you know if the site that you're working at is private property or public property? If it's public property, do you know if you have any areas that are restricted? These are all great things to ask yourself, to ask your company, and to figure out, okay? So there's your homework. All right, guys, let me check these comments real quick, see what we got. Someone asked if I'm in California. No, I am in Portland, Oregon. California East. I mean, it's basically California. We have the same stupid laws and policies. All right, I don't want to get in a political rant. I'm going to go ahead and get off here. You guys have a great day. As always, be safe, watch your back, watch your six. Oh, and check out my t-shirts and patches. www.bonesandbrewsecuritygear.com. bonesandbrewsecuritygear.com. Motherfucking bonesandbrewsecuritygear.com. Grab yourself a t-shirt, a morale patch. It helps to support the platform. My beard is getting gray. It helps to keep my beard from getting any more gray. And I appreciate you. You guys have a great day. Get some coffee in your system. Stay caffeinated. As always, be great.